I love finding unique stuff to review. It's not always good, but it's usually interesting. There's so much unexplored potential in the hi-fi market that it's entirely possible we never get to see some really good bargains. Last year, I took the plunge and bought a headphone from an unknown Chinese brand that sells only on AliExpress. The brand is OPENHEART. The product is their open back headphone. They don't have a catchy name for it, simply a description. This headphone costs just about $50. Are we in for a surprise or disappointment? I usually spend a little bit of time talking about the manufacturer's promises and marketing. For the OPENHEART headphone, well, there isn't much. The company probably has the most succinct information I've seen about a product. For the bass, OPENHEART says that we'll hear it, but it's not emphasized. They claim the mids are clear and have a sense of realistic reverb, particularly for vocals. The treble is supposed to be clear and detailed. That's it. That's all the information we get about this product, other than the typical specification rundown. A refreshing change of pace, isn't it? The OPENHEART headphone has a surprising build. It's simply unique, especially for $50. At the outset, you will notice that this headphone has more than a passing resemblance to Grados, particularly the SR60 and the SR80. But unlike those Grados, the OPENHEART headphone is made principally of metal. The ear cups are aluminum, the yoke prongs are metal, the retaining clamps linking the prongs to the headband are metal. The ear cups swivel a full 360 degrees, but because of the weight on this headphone, the ear cups do not flop around as they might with some SR60 and SR80 designs from Grado. This headphone comes with a number of accessories. The packaging should include one set of on-ear ear pads, one set of over-ear ear pads, a leather cable tie, a cable clip, a 1/4-inch adapter, a carrying bag, and, of course, the cable. And the cable, oh boy, the cable. It's very nice indeed. It's pliable, transmits little microphonics, and just looks and feels like a sturdy accessory. And, of course, as you can see, the cable is detachable and has no proprietary mechanisms, so you can change the cable if you want, and with little cost. The earpads are attached using the same Grado-style earpads you've seen. In fact, you could interchange official Grado earpads onto the OPENHEART headphone. The headband has no padding at all, but seems soft enough. There's a thin piece of metal frame beneath the fake leather. As for comfort, well, that will depend entirely on how much you hate Grado-style earpads. For me, the on-ear pads were generally comfortable. The over-ear pads were a bit stiff and not quite as comfortable. I use this headphone mostly with the on-ear ear pads. Consequently, I found the OPENHEART headphone reasonably comfortable. The clamp I think is fairly average. It's not tight, but it will sit securely around your head. I can wear this headphone for about 3 hours before needing a break. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised by the construction and accessories of this headphone. It's outstanding. In fact, leaps and bounds better than any other headphone I've seen in this price range. It's hands down a new standard for me. Comfort is always subjective, but if you've used Grado headphones in the past and did not like their fit, then I'm pretty sure you won't like these either. I use the OPENHEART headphones with numerous devices. This includes my RME ADI2 DAC, my Modi Liquid Spark stack, the NW ZX507, and the Matrix Mini I Pro 3. I use the stock accessories. My listening tests were done with the on-ear pads. I listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. The OPENHEART headphone is very easy to drive. I rarely had to increase volume beyond a few steps on my EcoZorda ITM03 or any dongle DAC I use with my phone and PC. In fact, you don't actually need an amp for this headphone. And if you decide you want to use an amp, a moderately powerful one is going to be plentiful. Additional amplification doesn't really make much noticeable difference, so don't feel compelled to use one. OPENHEART says that this headphone does not emphasize bass. I think that's an understatement. My tests indicate that this headphone has a bass roll-off, but a lot of clarity in the bass region in return. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, there's a low rumble from the beginning of the song. The OPENHEART was just able to render that detail. It was distant and fairly muted. Increasing volume to nearly my pain threshold resulted in a minor increase of sub-bass reverberation. Separation of sub-bass and mid-bass was fairly obvious, however. When the crescendo hit at the middle of the track, the organ cut through the other instruments. The rolling thunder effect was underemphasized and, frankly, distant. I could hear individual group sets which were clear and separate. When the vocals chimed in, they rose from the background until they were about shoulder to shoulder with the instruments. In Conquer by Overwork, there's a rolling marble sound at the beginning that pans from right to left to center. The OpenHeart was able to clearly recreate the sound of rolling marbles and some of the panning. There are multiple drums in this track, and the OpenHeart presented all of them clearly. Drum impact was a little bit blunted and lacked some reverberation. However, each drum strike had a sharp, thwacking sound. There was good separation among subsequent drum strikes. I listened to several hip-hop songs including Pure Water, New Patek, Reel It In, and Uproar. On each occasion, the OpenHeart rolled off the sub-bass. The subwoofer sounded like it was in another room. Drums were louder but still lacked reverberation. Vocals were always 2 steps ahead of instruments and retained their sparkle. There was clear separation among all elements in these tracks. I listened to my Sicario playlist. I used these songs to determine if there's any audible bass distortion. Even at high volumes, the OpenHeart never distorted. Everything was clear, but of course the sub-bass was noticeably rolled off and underrepresented. Overall, when OpenHeart says that this headphone does not emphasize bass, what they really should have said is that this bass is underemphasized. There's a pretty obvious roll-off. However, in exchange, you get good separation, detail, and fast transients in the bass region. OpenHeart says that the mids should sound lively or natural or realistic. My tests indicate that this headphone has forward mids with sibilant vocals. In Orla Gartland's song Why Am I Like This, there's natural vocal grain and sibilants mixed into the track. The OpenHeart kept the vocal grain neutral and smooth. However, the sibilance was noticeably emphasized. It was significantly more than what I heard on the neutral Aventone Planar and even more than what I heard on the slightly sibilant Olo S4X. Timbre of instruments seemed to be accurate. There was good separation between the drums and guitar with minimal melding between them. In Want You Back by Haim, the OpenHeart again showed that it accentuates female sibilants. It was more than what I heard on the Olo S4X and the Aventone Planar. At 8 seconds into the song, the primary vocalist says the word "we" and drags it out, making it sound gravelly. The OpenHeart clearly revealed this detail. There are 2 backup vocalists in the song, each with her own tonality and placement, one in the right and the other in the left. The OpenHeart easily separated all 3 vocalists. When the instruments played at maximum, the 2 backup vocalist voices melded into one. The timbre of drums, guitar, bass, and piano seemed to be accurate. There was only a slight bit of melding among their notes. In Superposition by Young the Giant, the OpenHeart correctly represented the ukulele, but it was louder than the drums and bass. The bass line was clearly underemphasized and the bass itself was recessed. The primary vocalist's voice received a slight emphasis in sibilance, though far short of what the OpenHeart did with female vocals. There's a backup singer whose voice is layered beneath the primaries. Most headphones and IEMs cannot reveal that second voice. The OpenHeart could not either. Between 1 minute and 10 and 1 minute and 20 seconds, there are supposed to be sharp intakes of breaths. The OpenHeart did recreate this detail clearly. Overall, the OpenHeart has forward mids. Vocals get a push in sibilants. That is quite obvious with female artists. If your recording has sibilants mixed in, the OpenHeart headphone will emphasize that detail. There's good separation among mid-centric instruments. OpenHeart says that this headphone has clear, crisp, and detailed treble. My tests indicate that this headphone has a slightly emphasized treble. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the OpenHeart clearly separated the brass and horns. They seemed to have correct timbre, but their higher pitched notes were a little bit emphasized. There seemed to be just a bit more energy than what I heard on the Aventone Planar, but it was similar to what I heard on the Olo S4X. These instruments did retain the nasally signatures on the OpenHeart. I could hear the various group sets, but not individual instruments. The OpenHeart has width, but no depth or verticality. In other words, some instruments seemed further out into the wings, but no sounds were layered as if being played from rows of instruments, and certainly no sounds came from above or below. In Flight from the City, the OpenHeart made the piano sound like it was 8 feet away. The bassier notes were underemphasized and had quick transients. I could hear the pops and sizzles and electric buzzing, details that are in the bottom layer of this track. The The cello was smooth, but the piano was a little bit louder. I could hear the creaking of wood on the pianist's bench and the shifting of the cello's weight. In Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, the OPENHEART presented the piano in the right, drums in the left, saxophone center, and the bass several steps behind. There was good separation among all instruments with minimal melding of their notes. The cymbals are struck at different points, which should result in varied tonalities. The OPENHEART was not able to reveal these different tonalities of the cymbals and made each cymbal strike sound identical. The saxophone was 2 steps ahead of the other instruments and seemed to have a bit more energy than what I heard on the Aventone planar. Overall, I would say that the OPENHEART headphone has a slight treble emphasis in the upper treble region. It's not a sharp push, and treble never seemed harsh or piercing. There's good clarity in the treble region and only minimal melding of notes. OPENHEART does not make any grandiose promises about the detail retrieval of their headphones. I think that the OPENHEART headphone has above average detail. It has good clarity and separation, resulting in obvious details being easily audible, and most subtle details usually easy to hear. Multiple vocalists, twangs of guitar strings, sharp intakes of breaths, the creaking of wood, shifting of cellos, pops and sizzles, electric buzzing, gravelly nature of voices, all of these details are clear. For a more quantitative test, I listened to the song New Light by Kazuki. This track has layers of details, including the sound of children playing, wind, rustling of grass, piano, synth, and footsteps. I count the number of footsteps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. The Sennheiser HD800S presents 22 footsteps, the Focal Clear, 18. The Austrian Audio Hi-X 65 presents 16 to 17 footsteps. The Austrian Audio Hi-X 55 presents 16. The Hi-Fi Man Sundara, Aventone Planar, Sifka Phoenix, and Beyerdynamic DT1990 each present 10 to 11 footsteps. The audeze LCD2 Closed and LCD2 Classic each provide about 7 to 8. The Monolith M1070, M1570, Sifka Robin, and the Ultrasound Pro 1480i all provide 8 to 9, and the older M1060C provides 7 footsteps. The audeze LCD1 and the HD6XX present 6 to 7 footsteps. The Neumann NDH20 presents 5 to 6 footsteps. The OPENHEART headphone rendered 10 to 11 footsteps. In this test, I used the HD6XX and the LCD1 as the average performers. Any headphone that provides more or less footsteps will be judged accordingly. Consequently, on my scale, the NDH20 is below average and the Sundara is above average. The OPENHEART presents details similar to the headphones in the above average category. This includes the Sundara, Aventone Planar, and DT1990. Details on the OPENHEART may not always be as clear as on these other headphones, but this quantitative test does show that they perform somewhat similarly. OPENHEART does not say anything about the Soundstage for their headphones. Based upon my repeated listening tests and experience with this headphone for over a year, I can easily conclude that it has about average Soundstage. As with my detail test, I have a scale I use to help explain Soundstage. I use the HD6XX and the LCD1 as the average performance. Anything above or below is judged accordingly. The audeze Mobius and all Beats headphones have claustrophobic soundstage. The NDH20 and the ATH M60X have below average soundstage. The HD6XX and the LCD1 have average soundstage. The Sifka Phoenix, Emotiva GR1, and Ultrasound Pro 1480i have average to maybe above average soundstage, depending on the particular recording. The Hi-Fi Man Sundara, Aventone Planar, Austrian Audio Hi-X 55 and X65, and the LCD2 Classic have above average soundstage. The Hi-Fi Man Diva has wide soundstage, and the HD800S has super wide soundstage. In my view, the OPENHEART has soundstage similar to that of the HD6XX. There's a fairly obvious difference between the OPENHEART and the Sundara, the latter providing a little bit wider soundstage. The OPENHEART headphones' sound signature might be a little bit unique in this price category. After all, for about $50 we typically see headphones with significantly emphasized bass or a muffled sound. There are exceptions, such as the Sony MDR MA100, but that headphone was discontinued years ago. OPENHEART doesn't say what we should expect from the sound signature, but they do kind of hint at it. They state once in their marketing that they were trying to achieve a balanced sound. Did they succeed? The OpenHeart headphone has a bass roll-off. This is abundantly obvious. Sub-bass is noticeably decreased. Mid-bass is louder and more present, but still not neutral. Indeed, drums sound a little bit blunted, but do have a sharp thwacking sound. There's good separation between sub-bass and mid-bass, and minimal bass bleed into the mids. The mids are forward. Female artists will get a sibilance push, and a fairly significant one. It's more than what the Olo S4X does, which is one of the more neutral headphones I've heard. The OpenHeart sibilance is not quite as present as that of the HD560S, but it's close. Mid-centric instruments sound clear with minimal melding. Treble has a slight emphasis near the upper treble region. Again, there's good clarity and separation among treble instruments. Nothing ever sounds harsh or piercing. It's typically easy to differentiate groups of treble-centric instruments. The OpenHeart has above-average detail retrieval. I attribute some of this to the diminished bass. This headphone has about average soundstage. So, yes, I would say that this is a balanced sound signature. You may not like it, but there's really no other way to describe it. The bass roll-off will turn some people off immediately, and the sibilance spike will cause concern for others. But if your music does not rely heavily on bass and your recordings do not have sibilance mixed in, then the OpenHeart's performance is clear, precise, and not fatiguing. Orchestral tracks, classical compositions, ambient music, spoken word, and similar genres tend to fare well on these headphones. Hip-hop, rock, and modern pop might not work so well on this headphone for you. I think reviewers should do as many comparisons as possible. We need to put products into context. We need to understand if a new product is a departure from what came before or a new lipstick on the same pig, like with the hifi HipDAC version 2. Here, we will compare the OpenHeart headphone against the Grado SR80E, Sennheiser HD400S, and the AKG K361BT. For these comparisons, I used the stock accessories. I plugged each headphone into a passive AB switch. That switch was plugged into the RME 80i2 DAC. I tried to volume match. I listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. The SR80 has greater sub-bass presence as well as longer decay. Separation of sub-bass from mid-bass is more obvious on the OpenHeart. The SR80 has harder mid-bass impact, and drums sound more full with longer reverberation. The OpenHeart has more clarity in the bass region. The mids are a little different. The SR80 has less vocal sibilance than the OpenHeart. However, the SR80 still accentuates this detail. The SR80, on the other hand, noticeably accentuates vocal grain while the OpenHeart doesn't. The SR80 places vocals closer to the ears. Timbre seems to be the same. Separation of instruments is clearer on the OpenHeart. The SR80 has closer to neutral treble rendition. The OpenHeart has a marginal emphasis near the upper range. The OpenHeart has more clarity and greater separation of instruments in this region than the SR80. The SR80 places all elements close to the ears and does not have the width of the OpenHeart. The OpenHeart has greater detail retrieval and wider soundstage. The HD400S has more sub-bass emphasis than the OpenHeart. It also has longer reverberation, longer than even the SR80. Separation of sub-bass from mid-bass is more obvious on the OpenHeart. Mid-bass impact is harder on the 400S. Clarity is greater on the OpenHeart. The mids are different between these headphones. Both headphones accentuate vocal sibilance, but the OpenHeart has more of it. In contrast, the 400S has more vocal grain. On both headphones, vocals are ahead of instruments. However, the OpenHeart has greater separation of all elements and greater clarity. The 400S always makes things sound more intimate, closer to the ears. The treble is closer to neutral on the 400S. The OpenHeart is not significantly different. As I said before, the OpenHeart has a marginal emphasis in the upper treble region. The 400S places all treble instruments closer to the ears. The OpenHeart has noticeably greater separation, clarity, and placement. The OpenHeart has greater detail retrieval and wider soundstage. The K361 has greater sub-bass emphasis than the OpenHeart. Separation of sub-bass from mid-bass is obviously greater on the OpenHeart. Mid-bass impact is harder on the 361. Clarity is greater and transience is faster on the OpenHeart. The mids are far more intimate on the 361. Vocals are sibilant on the 361, but not as much as on the OpenHeart. The 361 accentuates vocal grain, while the OPENHEART does not. All mid-centric elements are closer to the ears on the 361. The OPENHEART has greater separation and clarity in the meze region. Timbre seems to be similar. The 361 has a slight treble roll-off in the upper treble region. In comparison, the OPENHEART adds a slight amount of emphasis in the upper treble. Detail in treble instruments is clearer on the OPENHEART. The 361 makes all elements appear close to the ears, while the OPENHEART presents them noticeably further away. The OPENHEART has more clarity and separation in the treble area. The OPENHEART has greater detail and soundstage. My favorite part of reviews is the comparisons. I love doing them. There's no better way to figure out whether gear is actually different than to do real A/B tests. Sometimes you discover that your favorite headphones or IEMs lack something you didn't know you wished they had. Here, we can tell that the OPENHEART headphone is dramatically different from the likes of the SR80E, the HD400S, and the K361BT. Compared to these alternatives, the OPENHEART sounds bass light, which of course it is. Going back and forth, I kept feeling that the 400S and the 361 were bassy when I switched between them and the OPENHEART. The OPENHEART has a different sound signature that is immediately apparent. Its bass response is probably the most obvious difference, but how it deals with vocals and instruments is also considerably different. Its soundstage is easily greater than the competition's, as is its detail retrieval. Overall, the OPENHEART is a unique sounding headphone. If you're a fan of bass, then this headphone is not for you. If you prefer clarity, separation, and detail over a full bass rendition and you want a bit of airiness in the sound, then the OPENHEART might be worth your while. As with anything in life, one, all, or none of these headphones might appeal to you. I often get asked for sub $100 recommendations. It's fairly easy to find IEMs in this price category. There's just so many of them that you could go mad trying to make sense of all your options. But headphones, I think, are different. There's just so much crap in the sub $100 headphone market that it's difficult to find something different. And by that, I mean it's difficult to find something that's not the same driver being used by a multitude of companies. When I came across the OPENHEART open back headphone, I was intrigued. Honestly, I bought it because of its looks and accessories. I figured I would take the risk of losing $50 if the headphone gave me a different experience than the other stuff in its price range. And I wasn't wrong. The OPENHEART does provide a different experience. The bass is rolled off quite a bit. As an analogy, think of the Tin Hi-Fi T2. You know how some people say that IEM is bass anemic? Well, that's how you might feel about the OPENHEART. But in exchange, you get a lot of clarity and separation in the bass region. The mids are forward and quite sibilant. If your recordings have sibilants mixed in, this headphone will accentuate that detail. If your music does not have sibilants, then there shouldn't be an issue. Indeed, while listening to classical, orchestral, ambience, spoken word, and jazz, the OPENHEART never caused an issue in regards to sibilants. Treble is marginally elevated in the upper treble region. It's neither harsh nor piercing. This headphone presents width and clarity and separates treble instruments without difficulty. The OPENHEART does not have an intimate, warm sound signature. It's also not an analytical headphone. It's just different. OPENHEART says their headphone has crisp details. Yes, I think crisp is the thought that you might have while listening to this headphone. And it's the same thought I had when I listened to the Shure tape, an IEM that clearly was not suited for everybody. All of this brings us to value. For about $50, this OPENHEART open back headphone is undeniably value. You may hate the sound signature, but that's a personal matter. What I'm referring to instead is the excellent build and accessories with this product. Moreover, while the sound may not be to your liking, it is definitely different from other products you'll find in this price range. I personally want gear that is different from each other. I don't want headphones and IEMs that do the same thing with minor variations. I want to experience my favorite music in different ways, and that's the real joy of being an audiophile, in my opinion. Ultimately, the OPENHEART headphone is quite unique. If you're looking for a change and don't mind spending $50 to experiment, then this headphone is definitely worth serious consideration.